Let's discuss the legal boundaries and potential legal issues that private investigators face every single day. A private investigator is a professional hired to undertake investigatory work. The key word in that is professional. I often refer to myself as a professional investigator, not a private investigator. The legalities and the nature of the tasks a PI can handle are confined to many rules, regulations, laws, licensing, and ethical boundaries. Crossing these lines may expose the PI to substantial legal issues, from civil suits as well as criminal charges. First, let's look at the most often touted complaint about PIs, that being invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy is a legal concept that refers to actions or circumstances where an entity intentionally intrudes physically or otherwise upon the solitude, seclusion, or private affairs or concerns of an individual where such intrusion would be highly offensive to a reasonable person. Under U.S. law, invasion of privacy is typically divided into four distinct categories. 1. Intrusion upon seclusion or solitude or into private affairs. This is when someone intentionally intrudes, physically or otherwise, upon the solitude or seclusion of another individual or their private affairs. An example is wiretapping a telephone conversation or peeping through someone's window. This is likely the category most people refer to when speaking about invasion of privacy. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. Number 2, public disclosure of embarrassing private facts. This form of invasion of privacy occurs when one person reveals information which is not of public concern and the release of which would offend a reasonable person. For example, publishing intimate details of someone's medical conditions without their consent would fall under this category. Number 3, appropriation of name or likeness. This involves the use of an individual's name or image for personal or commercial advantage. Using someone's photograph in an advertisement without their consent might be an example of this. Number 4, false light. This represents a situation where publicity puts the subject in a false light in the public eye. Although the information might not technically be false, it presents the individual in a distorted way that they would not approve of. Publishing a misleading article implying that a person has done something wrong when they have not, for example, would fall under false light. Keep in mind, these categories provide a broad definition of invasion of privacy, but it's crucial to remember that legal parameters can differ from state to state and internationally. Invasion of privacy is one of the most frequently confronted legal issues for private investigators. Everyone is protected by various privacy rights, and violating these rights can lead to severe legal consequences. An example might be a scenario where a PI is hired by a spouse who is suspecting infidelity. The PI may follow the other spouse to gather evidence. If the PI crosses the line, such as tapping phone lines, planting listening devices, snooping electronically, email tracking, installing key logging software, things like that, it is considered an invasion of privacy. It could also violate federal wiretapping laws, which could result in criminal charges against the investigator and possible imprisonment. Then there is trespassing, which is a legal term that refers to a situation in which one person enters into another person's property without consent or exceeds the scope of consent given to visit the property. Trespassing is a civil violation that can also be a criminal offense, depending on the jurisdiction and the circumstances of the incident. In general, there are a few core elements to the definition of trespassing. 1. Unlawful entry. This refers to a person intentionally entering someone else's property without permission. Intent here merely means that the person meant to go onto the property, not necessarily that they knew it was trespassing. 2. Remaining on the property. Trespassing can also happen if a person overstays their welcome. That is, they're on the property lawfully, but then remain after they have been asked to leave. 3. Intrusion with physical elements. Trespass can also occur when a person places something onto or over the property of another person, like trash or debris, without permission. 4. Damage. While having caused damage can sometimes elevate to the severity of the trespass, it isn't a requirement to be found guilty of trespassing. Simply being on the property unlawfully is usually enough. Trespassing laws vary greatly, and what counts as trespassing in one jurisdiction might not in another. For instance, some jurisdictions require signage or fencing to delineate private property before unlawful entry can occur, while others do not. Criminal charges might be pursued when trespassing is done with criminal intent, like intending to commit a crime on the property. Moreover, in certain cases, the concept of reasonable expectation of privacy comes into play, especially where public space morphs into private space. Remember, these are broad generalizations about trespassing laws, and specific details can vary significantly from one jurisdiction to another. If you have a specific question or situation, you should contact a local attorney or a legal expert. In a nutshell, private investigators legally can't access private property without proper permission. Suppose a PI is investigating a case of potential insurance fraud, and he trespasses onto the claimant's property to gather evidence, such as taking photos. This act can lead to criminal trespass charges against the PI and could result in a civil suit. Impersonation is another legal boundary a PI should never cross. Impersonation is generally defined in the legal context as the act of intentionally assuming the identity of another person, usually with dishonest or fraudulent intent. Impersonation is a criminal offense in many jurisdictions when done with the intention to deceive or harm others. Here are some key elements of impersonation. False representation. This entails a person presenting themselves as someone else. This can be done through various ways, like using another person's name, their social security number, or other personal information. Intent to deceive. This is when the impersonator's goal is typically to deceive others into believing that they are the individual they are impersonating. Harm or personal gain. The intent behind the impersonation is typically to reap inappropriate benefit, such as accessing sensitive personal information, committing financial fraud, avoiding prosecution, or tarnishing another person's reputation. It's important to note that there are many forms of impersonation, and the specific applicable laws and penalties may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Impersonation can take various forms like identity theft, fraud, forgery. Each of these is addressed differently by the law. Examples of serious offenses include impersonating a police officer or a public official. Keep in mind, not all instances of impersonation are necessarily illegal. For example, actors, comedians, and impersonators by trade are not breaking the law when they impersonate for entertainment purposes, as there is no malicious intent or attempt to defraud someone. For PIs, impersonating anyone, particularly law enforcement officers or government officials, is usually illegal and definitely unethical. In a case where a PI is trying to find information about a missing person, impersonating a law enforcement officer to extract more intel from the missing person's contacts or neighbors might seem expedient, but such actions could potentially lead to criminal charges for false impersonation. It should stand to reason that assault and battery is definitely crossing that line for PIs out there. Private investigators must adhere to the same laws as everyday citizens. They cannot assault or physically harm anyone. Assault and battery are two distinct but often related legal concepts that typically fall under the umbrella of criminal law, though they can also appear in civil cases. Keep in mind that the exact definition and penalties might vary depending on the jurisdiction and local laws. Assault is generally defined as an intentional act that puts another person in reasonable apprehension of harmful or offensive contact. It's important to note that in most jurisdictions, actual physical contact is not necessary for assault to occur. The key is that the person must reasonably fear that bodily harm or offensive contact will occur. Battery, on the other hand, involves intentional physical contact or force applied to another person without their consent. This may range from any form of harmful, offensive, or unwelcome touch. The touch does not have to cause physical injury. It can be deemed battery even if it's merely offensive or unwanted. For an example, if someone swings a fist at you, they might be charged with assault even if they do not make contact, as their actions may induce a reasonable fear of harm. If they hit you, they may also be charged with battery due to unwanted physical contact. For instance, a PI cannot engage in a physical confrontation with the person that they're surveilling, even if that person becomes hostile upon discovering they are being watched. This could lead to both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit against the PI for damages. Let's now look at deception and fraud. Using deceit to obtain personal information about an individual is a serious breach of law in many jurisdictions. PIs have the limits on the methods they can use to conduct investigations and gain access to information. A PI, for example, cannot con a bank teller into revealing a customer's transaction history under the guise of verifying account details for a banking audit. The PI would be breaking the law, and this could lead to fraud charges. Here is a quick recap of those things you need to keep an eye out for and make sure you comply with all the rules, regulations, and laws pertaining to each. Invasion of privacy is one of the most frequently confronted legal issues for private investigators. Everyone is protected by various privacy rights, and violating these rights can lead to severe legal consequences. Trespassing is another no-no. Private investigators legally can't access private property without proper permission. Impersonating anyone, particularly law enforcement officers or government officials, is illegal and unethical. Assault and battery, two distinct but similar issues, are something you must be aware of. Private investigators must adhere to the same laws as everyday citizens. They cannot assault or physically harm anyone or threaten to do so. And using deceit to obtain personal information about an individual is a serious breach of law in most cases. Remember, private investigators can be instrumental in providing valuable resources, but they must be extremely mindful of legal boundaries to avoid potential liabilities as well. Ignorance of the law is no defense. A thorough understanding of the legal landscape is crucial to the day-to-day operations for every private investigator.